Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our show. This evening, we have in our studios Mr. Stokely Carmichael, who will share some ideas with us on the international implications of black power. I am your host and moderator, Hayward Henry. To my left is Mrs. Andrea Coxum, a reporter from the Boston Globe, and to her left is Mr. Les Range, a reporter from the Christian Science Monitor. Mr. Carmichael is with us this evening after he has just returned from a trip where black writers held a conference on the continuing dynamics of the black liberation struggle. At that conference, some very interesting and provocative political processes apparently emerged. We've been informed that one of the participants, a brother Dr. Walter Rodney, has been excluded from return to his homeland. Brother Carmichael, what do you see as the implications of such political activities and decisions by governments as that just made affecting Brother Rodney?
Well, I think we have to understand that that's really the United States. That the United States has now developed a new technique, recognizing the danger of black people around the world coming together. The United States has decided that she must break up this process, but without appearing as if she's doing it, because if she were to appear as if she was herself doing it, it would only heighten the contradictions. So now what she is doing is that the countries that she controls, she's telling them to bar people who were born there from returning. For example, in Jamaica, the Caribbean, and the latest spot is the Caribbean. The United States has done this all over Africa. But now because of a lot of work that we've been doing quietly in the Caribbean, which is now beginning to surface, she's moving very directly in the Caribbean. Jamaica, the literature of Malcolm X, the literature of Frantz Fanon, the literature of Elijah Muhammad, and the literature of Stokely Carmichael is banned. The literature, that is, any books written by any of these people, cannot be brought into the country. And this is clearly not the workings of the masses of Jamaican people, because all of the people listed are black people talking about the black liberation struggle in the world, and they have not made any offenses, either physical or verbal, against these governments. So that clearly it is the United States moving to block any of this literature, any of these people from entering. Now, the case in point of Dr. Walter Rodney is very important. Now, here's a brother who was born in Jamaica. He's been all over the world. Very together brother. He taught at the University of Tanzania, where we met. He left Tanzania and returned to Jamaica last year. He was teaching at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, and he's been there quietly. He left 5 days ago and came to the conference in Montreal, which was a very explosive conference in terms of the international black people that came together. And when he returned to Jamaica, they deported him. And certainly he has made nothing against the Jamaican government. You take my point in view, my own homeland where I was born, Trinidad, I am barred from Trinidad. And again, I have made no offenses against the Trinidadian government. It's clearly, again, the United States afraid of the dynamism of black power getting hold in those islands and knocking out the control that the American imperialists have over the Caribbean islands.
Are you saying then that it is the official or unofficial policy of the United States government to take specific steps to prevent the spread of black power in other black nations?
I'm saying that precisely, yes. In this country here, its object has been to co-opt the black power slogan, to have people think that you can have black power and black capitalism work hand in hand, which is absolutely absurd and nonsensical. It is a way to dilute the definitions and to confuse the masses of our people and to completely corrupt the political ideology of black power. But sensing that around the world other people are now beginning, black people, to look towards black power, its aim is to cut those international ties. I'm saying precisely, and I charge the United States with that. Yes, for example, I cannot travel to England. I cannot travel to Venezuela. I cannot travel to Trinidad. I cannot travel to Jamaica. I cannot travel to the Bahamas. I cannot travel to Argentina. And I've done nothing against any of these countries.
What do you interpret as the specific reason for the action taken against Brother Rodney? Do you think it was because of his association with this particular conference?
It's clearly because of that association, you see, because this conference brought together people from the West Indies, people from Africa, people from Canada, people from the United States, and people from South America. All these people were black. And we were all talking about internationalizing the concept of black power and moving concretely to begin to find bases where black people can begin to hang their hats. This causes and spells trouble for the United States. Therefore, it must move against this type of work.
Brother Carmichael, are there other black political refugees in this country, such as Rap Brown and others who have spoken out?
Yes, I think that the United States is moving on two battles, on two fronts. For example, when I returned to the country last year, the United States illegally seized my passport and held it for 8 months. It had no grounds for which to take my passport. I traveled to Cuba, I traveled to North Vietnam, I traveled to Algeria, to Syria, to Egypt, and to China. All of these countries, one is forbidden to use your passport for entry. See, the passport said that this document, it is invalid to use this document to travel into Cuba, North Vietnam, China, and they list the countries. I never used the passport to travel into Cuba, into Vietnam, into China, or anywhere. I was invited by some people in those countries, and I went, and I didn't have to have it stamped, so that they had no right to take my passport. But because the United States is afraid, and more because a lot of us are traveling abroad and beginning to hook in internationally, she cannot afford to have that. She seized the passport. Now, politically, it wasn't very well. It didn't go very well with the United States to talk about freedom of travel and still seize my passport. So after a number of maneuvers back and forth, they had to return the passport. But now their aim is to appear as if they have given me a passport, but to stop other countries where the potential of black power can become a reality which will affect American imperialism. Not only its racism, but American imperialism, it now moves to stop. Now, what it does then is moves on two fronts. The second front is that the way it moves with Rap Brown, Elridge Cleaver, and Leroy Jones, by making them political refugees where they cannot move. For example, Rap Brown is the only black man in America that lives in Manhattan and needs a visa to travel to Brooklyn.
So this does apply even within the United States?
Even within the United States. And the United States employs this around the world. There are hundreds of thousands, I would say even millions, of black political refugees around the world. And we become political refugees and we have absolutely nothing to do with the political struggles that go on. The political struggles are white political struggles, but they're white political struggles over the control of black people, and we get caught in the middle. Every time there's a coup in an African country which is brought about by white Western imperialistic forces, then thousands of black people have to run. But again, no one wins because the people who come out on top is white people. Let us take the Congo as a specific example. In the Congo, you had Shambe and Mobutu and Lumumba. When the white imperialist forces killed Lumumba and put Shambe, tens of thousands of black people living in the Congo had to flee the Congo, looking for political refuge in the surrounding countries. When Shambe is overthrown, then other thousands have to flee. And again, we're always fleeing, but we get nothing. We get nothing because the people who control these puppets like Shambe and the others, in Ankara, who's now in Ghana, and thousands of people who had to flee when Dr. Nkrumah was overthrown, are the white forces that control the wealth, and we still have to be running around. My wife is a political refugee from her own country, born and bred in South Africa. Some white invaders come and kick black people out of their own land and tell them they cannot return. We have thousands of political refugees from South Africa, Mozambique, Angola, Southwest Africa, Guinea-Bissau. All of Africa is just flooding with black political refugees, and now the United States is plotting to move it into the Caribbean, and then the final step, of course, into the United States.
What?
Brother Carmichael, will the attempt to create political refugees, black political refugees, do anything to end an international movement towards black power that you speak of?
I think that's precisely what the United States is trying to do. For example, if she could forestall or hold back the people who she thinks are a threat to her economy in Jamaica, then she can just cut us out completely. and we cannot go in. So she hopes then to forestall the black liberation struggle, which is really on its peak.
Will it be effective?
It will be effective, yes, unless black people now begin to understand how to move to stop that. Now, what happens, unfortunately, is that, again, the white man comes out on top. Because, for example, the Caribbean islands are islands which black political refugees and people who are concerned about the masses of people living in those islands, we do not want to move against the other black people. But what will happen is that we will be forced, because the Caribbean now opens itself to a very precarious position. Most of these islands in the Caribbean, for example, thrive off the tourist business. To begin to stop political refugees from entering opens up a course for student rioting and certainly terroristic activities against the tourist industries.
How do you specifically recommend that the black American, with his new awareness of the international nature of the struggle, how specifically do we move to effectively counteract or neutralize the kind of political isolation that is occurring?
Okay, number one, we have to understand how the white West moves. It is clear that whenever they want control of a country, they can no longer just invade the country. So what they have to do is to pit person against person. That's been a technique developed since World War II with the white imperialist forces. For example, they split Korea. There's North Korea fighting South Korea, and they're not invading, they're coming to help the South Koreans beat up the bad guys, because they're the good guys. They split North Vietnam against South Vietnam, and they're not invading, but they're coming to help the good guys in South Vietnam beat up the bad guys in North Vietnam. And now we see they've done the same thing in Nigeria. They have split again. Now there's Biafra versus Nigeria, and they're not going to be invading, but they're just going to come and help the good guys, whichever they decide happen to be the good guys. Of course, it's going to be with their interest. So we must begin to consciously recognize this, so that we can't be out there picking sides with Nigeria and picking sides with Biafra, but rather talking about these two people getting together and stop fighting, because nobody's profiting but the white man. Because the fighting by Biafra and Nigeria, while heightened certainly by tribalistic differences, thank you, English, tribalistic differences. Tribalistic differences certainly is not really the sole context of the fight. Biafra is very rich in oil. And since the Arab countries have closed their oil ports due to the conflict in the Middle East, it would be very helpful for practically every white country in Europe to be able to get to that oil.
Now, Brother Carmichael, it seems that the same kind of process is happening in many of the South American nations today, in which the United States is economically and politically controlling them. How do you compare the attempt by many of the Asian and African nations to engage in liberation struggles as opposed to those in Latin America?
I think we are going to. There's no alternative. I think that in terms of the Asian situation, it's clear. It's crystal clear. The United States controls completely Japan. Japan is, as far as I'm concerned, yellow America. And through her control of Japan, she's trying to stretch out her tentacles to influence the rest of Asia. Thank God Vietnam is stopping her, because Vietnam really represents the real block to what she wants to get to, China. Now, in Latin America, the only bloc they've had is Cuba. But Cuba is not really a military threat. There's only a political threat. It's an island which they have to fight the political ideas, because the political ideas of the Cuban revolutionaries might spread to the other Latin American countries. But other than that, there is no threat. Now, the next spot left, obviously, is Africa. And Africa becomes central, because if black people who are becoming aware to a political consciousness begin to hook up with Africa inside America, then America becomes in a lot of trouble. Because if, for example, America decided to invade South Africa, decided to invade Haiti, decided to invade Trinidad, decided to invade Tobago, Jamaica, on the side of the good guys, then the black people in this country could stand up and say, keep your hands off of it, it's a black man's fight, stay out. And if she refuses to, then she has another war inside.
Is there any attempt going on now to get this kind of political awareness for black people in America, for the total picture of the struggle internationally?
Oh yes, while the United States has been busy trying to dilute the concept of black power and make it look as if it's a local nonsense, some of us have been internationalizing it. because black power cannot be seen in a local aspect of black power in Boston, or black power in Roxbury, or black power in the United States, or black power in Canada, or black power in the West Indies. It has to be seen in black power in the world. It must be seen in that context.
One of the early black political refugees from this country was Robert Williams. Do you know where he is at this time and what political activities he's involved in?
Mr. Williams was in China. He's now in Tanzania, and he's working with the people who are setting up the new Republic of Africa inside this country. He is the leader of that group, and they themselves are now trying together and band together with a number of other political refugees. For example, Tanzania is just loaded with political refugees because it's right on the border of Mozambique. And see, all of the people who flee from the harsh treatment of the Portuguese, or even the brothers and sisters who get a chance to flee from South Africa, as soon as they run up, they always come right into Tanzania.
What is your opinion about the attempt being made to establish the Republic of New Africa? Have you had a chance to meet yet with any of the brothers and sisters involved?
No, I haven't had a chance to really have a serious talk at it. I think it's another area where people are thriving, and that we should try, each in our own area, to see which one works best. I don't know very much about it, but I think that the people who are in it are serious about what they're doing, and we have to, if we can, aid it in any way we can to make it a successful program.
Will there be an attempt to help Walter Rodney return to Jamaica?
Yes, now, as I said earlier, see, what the West Indies now does is opens itself for really terroristic activities. Because if it bans Walter Rodney from returning to Jamaica, and already student rioting has begun in Jamaica and Trinidad early this morning, then there's nothing left except to begin that terroristic activity against. So you see, you don't want to play into the white man's hands by fighting black people against black people, because that's precisely what he wants. I mean, that's why they've been creating all the friction inside the United States with this black group against that black group, hoping to heighten the friction within black groups so that we can arm and fight ourselves while they sit back.
Conquer and divide.
Right, so we cannot allow to play into the hands. At this time, we must de-emphasize any, certainly publicly, political friction we have with any other black group inside our communities. We must, because they will play on that and heighten it. Now, we recognize that's precisely what they want in Jamaica. But the way to move against them in a terroristic activity, destroying any sort of tourist activities, will bring the economy in those countries to a screeching halt. Also, for example, in Jamaica, America has large bauxite companies. Right. People will begin to develop a consciousness not to move against other black people, but to move against those bauxite companies, because we recognize who the enemy is.
Imperialism at home and imperialism abroad, part of the same continual process.
Dr. Nkrumah says when it's domestic, it's capitalism. When it's international, it's imperialism. So the black man is internationalized, whether we like it or not, so it must be imperialism.
You mentioned, Brother Carmichael, that your wife is a political refugee from South Africa. What efforts are being made to liberate black South Africans?
Well, there's several guerrilla groups. That's the only effort that can be made. And that, for example, in Africa, there are a lot of fighting that's going on, but the white man will never talk about that fighting, because he's afraid that it will heighten the political consciousness of Africans living inside the United States. He will talk about the Biafran War and try and begin to show some nonsensical pity about black people starving in Biafra. That's nonsense. No white man is ever concerned about black people starving and dying. And certainly Lyndon Baines Johnson is not concerned. Kennedy is not concerned. Nixon is not concerned. Humphrey is not concerned. None of them are concerned, because inside their own country, thousands of black people die each year starving to death. So they're not concerned. They're only doing that because of their own political interest. The only way that we will free anywhere in Africa, the only way we will free anywhere is with the gun in our hands. All those countries must be freed, but by guns, by arms. The white man didn't go into those countries with nonviolent means. He doesn't oppress people in South Africa with nonviolence. He oppresses them with the guns. It's our job to begin to raise our consciousness so we can raise money and help those brothers get some guns and kill every white man they see in South Africa.
Brother Carmichael, what is your particular opinion about the unusually large number of black men fighting in Vietnam, ostensibly a war which is not in the interest of black people, a war which is obviously a racist war?
Well, I think we've been crystal clear on that. We said, very simple, a long time ago, hell no, we won't go. I mean, I think everyone knows what the position is. There's no need now to reiterate. The time is to move to try and get some type of tactics that will begin to alleviate the drafting of young black men. And certainly if one cannot avoid the draft, then one should go and kill the enemy.
How do you interpret the recent action of the brothers at Fort Hood, Texas, who refused to come to the Democratic National Convention, understanding that they may possibly have to destroy black people?
I applauded the action. I thought it was very courageous, and it shows that black people are heightening their consciousness, regardless of what they say on the press.
Do you think this is a beginning, then, of a kind of internal resistance by black people in the situation where they would normally have to destroy black people?
Right, and it must spread. It must. It will spread. There's no way to stop it. It will spread.
I think something many black people in America have been interested in is how Africans feel towards them. Can you tell us something about that?
Well, you should ask my wife. She's African. That's right. I think we can't afford to get caught up in what the white man says about Africans don't like African Americans. That's the white man talking. I've been all over Africa, and everywhere I've been to Africa, including Liberia, I have been welcomed with open arms by thousands of people.
Excuse me. Will there be a follow-up to the Congress of Black Writers where black political refugees will get together and discuss new techniques and new tactics?
Oh, there will be. Yes, there has to be. But I think it's also important for our brothers and sisters in the United States to begin to become aware. Now, let me show you. For example, the so-called state of Israel gets thousands of dollars in aids and sells jets to America sells jets to them. And that's because of the powerful force of Zionism in the United States, where they wage a lobby for the so-called state of Israel. Now, we black people have, it seems to me, a stake in this country since I sweat built it. Therefore, we should say, if X person wants to come to this country, he can come. And we have to build a political, for example, we don't know when they expel African students. They expel African students from this country just like that, and we're never aware of it. But certainly it must become our job to find out against that when they start to begin to try, that we begin to use means to stop it. And begin to, if money is going to go, let's get some of that money, you know.
Brother Carmichael, in your book, Black Power, The Politics of Liberation, you had some specific opinions about coalition politics and about why such coalitions have not worked to the advantage of black people. What do you see as new kinds of coalitions for us in the future?
Internationalizing our ties with other black people around the world. That's the coalition we have to work for now. Because there have been black people who have made the mistake in the past, it seems to me, of coalescing with so-called white radical groups without ensuring that those white radical groups would wage a fight against racism. They've done that in the past time and time again.
So you're saying there should have been evidence of the extent to which any such parties is committed before making coalition.
Right, and it cannot just be in terms of words. It must be in terms of actions. And
do you think that there's anything in particular that we can learn from the experiences of men like Du Bois and Garvey and Malcolm X, who also attempted to internationalize the movement?
I think that we have to, I think we definitely have to follow in their footsteps. Definitely. I mean, that's a rhetorical question. You're the moderator, you can't say it.
Well, Brother Carmichael, it's certainly been our pleasure to have had you with us in the studios today. We think that certainly the discussion which we've had is a very crucial one, a very important one. We will certainly be looking forward to hearing more from you on this particular subject. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, thank you for having come.
Thank you very much.
Well, I thought that was a pretty good discussion.